Welcome, my being economics students, to this lecture today on a review of units 1.1 to 1.6, basically about demand, supply, and equilibrium. So this is a video review about the the economic concepts of demand, supply, and equilibrium. We'll be going into the law of demand, the law of supply, the market equilibrium, the shifts in demand, the shifts in supply, and calculating equilibrium. So these are the crucial things you want to know for your chapter 1 to 3 semester exam. So it's really important that you understand these basic microeconomics concepts, and this is basically all you need to know. This is like quite a long video. However, we go into quite depth. If you want depth, we have more videos and it's more in depth, but this is just an overview of the concepts you need to know to prepare for the tests. Now, the first thing you need to know is the law of demand. The law of demand basically states that as the price of a good rises, the quantity of a good demanded decreases. Now, as the price of a good decreases, the quantity demand of the good increases. So that of which could be illustrated through the graph as we could see right here. So this graph right here illustrates the concept that the quantity demanded and the price level has an inverse relationship, that when the price rises, the quantity demanded decreases, and when the price decreases, the quantity rises. So we give the example right here. We give like when the price is 2, it's 5 units demanded and stuff like that. Now, the test may ask you, what causes and what affects, why does demand shift downward? Why does consumers demand less quantity as the price level increases? Now, what you could say is these two things. You could say the income effect and the substitute effect. The income effect basically states as the price of a good decreases, the real income, which means the ability for consumers to the ability for consumers to spend money increases. So they are able to buy more with the money they have. Of consumer increases and thus able to afford more quantities of a good. So as the price of a good decreases, consumers with the existing money they have is available to afford more of the good. Therefore, because they're able to afford more of the good, they demand more of a good. And that's the first reason why demand increases as prices go down, or demand decreases as prices go up. Now, the second thing is the substitute effect. As the price of a good increases, the competitive good appears more appealing, and consumers will go to choose substitutes instead of demanding more. So the substitute effect is extremely prime and extremely clearly seen in examples such as Coca-Cola versus Pepsi, such as Coca-Cola versus Pepsi. For example, if Coke raises its prices by $1, then obviously and Pepsi remains the same prices, then the good of Pepsi will become more appealing, seeing as how the substitute effect, that's highlighted right here, the substitute effect shows that when the price of a substitute good, a close substitute good, rises, then the other good becomes more appealing, and therefore consumers will flunk to the other good instead of buying or demanding more of the original good. So this is basically the law of demand. It's very important that you understand the demand curve shifts downwards, which means it has a negative slope. Okay? Now, that is basically the review of the law of demand. Now, let's go to the review of the law of supply. The law of supply basically states that there is a direct correlation between the price of a good and a firm's willingness and ability to supply the product or service, ceteris paribus. Okay, so that means usually as the price of a good increases, the desire for firms to provide or supply more goods increases. Therefore, as the price increases, the supplied quantity increases, and as price decreases, firms are less incentivized to produce more goods. Therefore, the quantity produced or quantity output decreases. Therefore, the supply curve is a curve that shifts upwards, seeing as how the willingness and ability for firms to produce goods decreases as the price decreases, and the willingness for firms to produce goods increases as the good for a good increases. So from this example, we could basically illustrate how the positive correlation between the price and the quantity of a good has a direct connection, that of which is the law of supply. So as the price of a good increases, the quantity produced of good increases, because firms are incentivized more to profit maximize. We need to remember that firms are profit maximizers. They want to maximize their profit. Therefore, by producing more goods at higher prices, firms are able to maximize their profit. while producing less goods, for example, at this area right here, when producing less goods, when prices are lower, firms are able to minimize their losses and perhaps allocate their resources to more efficient sectors of the economy. Okay, so market equilibrium. Now let's move into the next concept of video lecture 1.3, where we talk about market equilibrium. So market equilibrium is when we take the concepts of demand and take the concepts of supply and put them together. So as we can see in this curve, in this diagram right here, we put the concepts together in order to reach a equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity of the good that is being examined right here. Equilibrium, to put simply, is the intersection or the meeting point between the supply and demand curves. So right here, we can see the demand curve, that of which shifts downwards. This one that I am moving right here. This is the demand curve that shifts downwards. And right here, this curve that I'm moving right here, this is the supply curve. The supply curve shifts upwards. And at the point in which these two curves meet, that of which is the equilibrium quantity. So the market equilibrium, as I am highlighting right here, the market equilibrium is when the quantity supplied equals the quantity demanded for a product at a given price point. Okay? So let's say, for example, at this price point, at a price point of 1.5, does market supply equals market demand? No, it does not. At the price point of right here, does market supply equals market demand? No, it does not. At this point right here, what we could call around $1.5, what we have is an axis in demand because there's more demand. However, right here at let's say at a price point of 4.5, what we have is an axis of supply, where there's more suppliers willing to provide the good at a certain price range. However, when we reach the price range around $3, then what we reach is the equilibrium price, when the suppliers and demand and the consumers meet at an agreeable price of $3. And they also agree on the quantity of 3. So therefore, we're able to see that the market equilibrium is reached when the supply curves and the demand curves intersect each other. Okay, so this is basically the concepts for market equilibrium. Now, I'm going to jump to Unit 1.6 first, where we talk about calculations for a market equilibrium. So calculations for market equilibrium, we could be derived from the linear equations of a quantity demanded and quantity supplied. So we know that a quantity supplied curve, or QS curve, has a positive slope, seeing as how the QS curve shifts upwards, and vice versa. We also know that the demand curve, or the QD curve, shifts downwards, seeing as how the slope of the QD curve, as highlighted right here, is negative. So by putting these two together, because remember, by definition, the market equilibrium is reached when the QS equals QD. Right, when quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. So what we do is we do QS equals QD, which is equal to this. So we put these two equations together. 1400 minus 200p equals negative 400 plus 400p. So this is when we put the supply and demand curves together, where by definition the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied, therefore reaching market equilibrium. So market equilibrium by definition is when the quantity supplied equals quantity demanded, and by using these calculations, by making the QD equals QS equal, then we will be able to derive our quantity, our price level at which QD equals QS. So let's say if we move the negative 200p to the other side, we get this equation. If we move the negative 400 to the other side, we get this equation. Therefore, we're able to derive that the market equilibrium price at which QD equals QS is 3. Now, by getting a market equilibrium price of 3, there's basically two ways of calculating the quantity demanded, or the equilibrium quantity. We could use the demand method or the supply method. By using the demand method, we simply plot or bring in the equation of P equals 3 into the demand linear equation. And if we're going to calculate using the supply method, then we basically put P equals 3 into the QS linear equation model. Therefore, by using these two calculations and these two methods of calculations, theoretically, the results should be the same, which in this instance it is, where the results of the quantity demanded using either the demand method or supply method reaches us to the conclusion of 800 units, which derives and gives us the final answer that at the equilibrium price of 3, equilibrium price of 3, the equilibrium quantity is 800 units. So these are the concepts of equilibrium in the free market, and now we would like to talk about the shifts in the demand curve. Now, in previous examples, we talked about ceteris paribus, right? When all things are equal, and there is only one variable factor. In this example, the variable factor is the demand curve. As we know, the demand curve could shift based on 5 primary reasons. The first one is consumer income. So as if consumer income increases, then usually the demand for a good will also increase. When consumer income decreases, usually the demand for a good also decreases. So consumer income is a major determinant of demand, that of which shifts the demand curve either leftwards or upwards. So the consumer's income will either increase or decrease the demand for a certain product. Now, the second major determinant of demand is the price of related goods, either complementary goods or substitute goods. For example, Coca-Cola and Pepsi are substitute goods. If the price of Coca-Cola rises, that means demand for Pepsi may rise because the price of a substitute good rises. However, if a price of a substitute good decreases, then a substitute good will increase in demand. So the substitute good has an inverse relationship in price and demand for the good. Now, complementary good refers to goods that are complementary to each other, or necessary or optimal for each other to be used. For example, iPhone cases and iPhone sales are complementary goods, seeing as how when iPhone sales increases, then the demand for iPhone cases also increase. However, when iPhone sales decreases, then the demand for iPhone cases also decrease. Therefore, the relationship from this example we could get is a complementary relationship, where the complementary good of these two goods affect directly the demand of another product. Now, consumer taste is the third primary determinant of demand. Obviously, consumers' taste changes. Obviously, for a great example is back in the 90s, baggy jeans, baggy pants is all the hype. People have a great demand for baggy pants, baggy jeans, baggy, sweaters, clothes and stuff. However, now in the 2020s, in the 2020s nowadays, people don't really like to wear baggy jeans. People like to wear, skinny jeans, like to wear slim fits, the slim cut, the X-cut suits. So the consumer tastes also change the demand for goods. So as the consumer tastes change, then the demand for goods also changes accordingly. Okay. Consumer expectations is once again another crucial determinant of demand you really need to know. For example, let's say a new iPhone, okay, a prime example, a new iPhone comes out every January. And let's say it's already November. You know that the new iPhone is going to come out in 2 years. Would you rather spend money and buy the current iPhone, or would you rather wait for 2 more months and perhaps spend a little more money to buy the new iPhone? So consumer expectations of the producers in the market, in the market, and consumer trust is another example of another primary determinant of demand, that of which will show and illustrates how the demand of a product will increase or decrease. You really need to be able to give examples. The great example is, for example, iPhones and consumers being expected to have a new iPhone coming out soon. That's the prime example that I would give if IB Paper 1, IB Paper 2, or for HL students, IB Paper 3 asks you to give illustrations and examples of the determinant of demand. You really need to be able to state these. Now, the third major determinant of demand is the number of buyers. Obviously, as the number of buyers increases, the demand and aggregate demand for a good will generally increase. However, when the number of buyers decreases, then normally the overall or the general demand for a good will also decrease. Okay. So these make sense. Now, how do we graph and how do we illustrate the increase and decrease in demand in graphic form? Now, when there is an increase in demand, we basically shift the demand curve right. Okay, so initially the demand curve is right here, but when the demand increases, we shift this curve rightwards as the arrows show. So when drawing on the graph, perhaps in paper 1, you have to be able to draw the increase in demand with this curve. Now, the decrease in demand is exactly the same, however, the direction. Instead of moving from the left to the right, as in the case of the increase in demand and the decrease of demand, the demand curve shifts from the right to the left. So these are really important for you to be able to illustrate in graphic form the determinants of demand and a shift in the demand curve. Now, a very important thing, now that we know the shift in the demand, we also need to know the shift in supply. So how do we illustrate the shift in the supply? I'm going to go into that first. So the illustration of the shift in supply is, once again, when there is an increase in supply, the supply curve shifts to the right. However, when there is a decrease in supply, the supply curve shifts to the left. Now, what are the factors or what are the determinants of supply that influences the supply to either shift upwards or shift downwards? What influences supply to increase and decrease? Now, there are basically 6 reasons why supply will either increase or why supply will either decrease. Now, the number of seller is the most prominent and a go-to example of shift in supply curves. Now, when the amount or quantity of suppliers increases, then generally the quantity supplied and the overarching supply curve of the market will shift to the right, seeing as how the number of sellers increases. Likewise, when the number of sellers decreases, for example, in competitive or perfectly competitive market structures where there are less and litter barriers to entry, and firms are freely able to join and freely able to leave, then the number of sellers will easily increase and decrease. Therefore, when the number of sellers decreases, then the supply curve will often shift to the left, signifying how there is a decrease in supplies. And the second major determinant of supply is the price of resources, or the price of raw material. Let's say you own a raw manufacturing firm for duct tape. Now, in duct tape, there's obviously plastic, you obviously need to have paper, you obviously need to have glue. Okay, so these are the important raw materials for the production of duct tape. Now, in this example, if there is a high increase in raw materials, let's say the oil prices goes out the roof. It's now $60 per barrel. So oil prices are out the roof. Therefore, plastic prices are also out the roof. So the production cost, the average total cost and the total cost of production for a roll of duct tape increases. As the total cost of a duct tape increases, producer income and producer profit decreases because the production cost increases. As the production cost increases, producer revenue and producer profit decreases because revenue, I'm going to write this down, revenue okay, so profit equals revenue minus cost. Profit equals revenue minus cost. So it's important for you guys to know this. So as the cost of a good increases, the profit usually decreases, therefore leading to firms incentivized to produce less to minimize losses and to allocate resources to more productive sectors of the economy. Therefore, there is a decrease in supply, as this graph right here illustrates, where the supply curve shifts leftwards. Okay, so the prices of resources is another major determinant of supply. Taxes and subsidies now are 2 units from now. After the elasticity unit, we are going to be talking more in depth about taxes and subsidies, but for right now, all you have to know is that taxes increases the expense and the cost for firms to produce, while subsidies decreases the expenses and costs and increases the profit for producers to produce. So when there is subsidies, then usually firms are incentivized to produce more, therefore a increase in supply. However, when there is a tax or a levied tax on producers, perhaps in tariffs and import tax, and ad volume tax and specific tax, or in consumer tax, then then producers are incentivized to produce less as to minimize losses and to maximize profit. So taxes and subsidies is another major determinant of supply. Technology, obviously, when technology increases and technology becomes more efficient, then firms become more efficient and firms become more productive, lowering the total cost. When the total cost is lowered, then there is an increase in supply. So technology also plays a major role. Expectations and related products, those are which, related and substitute products are also really, really important when it comes to the determinants of supply. Overall, these are the determinants of supply. So from these few units, from these 6 units, we are able to illustrate and go through the basic concepts of the law of demand, the illustration of demand, the law of supply, the illustration of supply. We're able to go into the market equilibrium, the equilibrium, how to calculate equilibrium, what is the equilibrium, price and quantity, and we also been able to go over the shifts in the demand, the 5 primary reasons: consumer income, related products, either complementary or substitute goods, consumer taste, consumer expectations, and a number of buyers. As well, we are also able to go into the sellers and the determinants of supply, that which influences the determinants of supply through the number of sellers, through the price of resources, taxes, subsidies, technology, expectations, related products, and overall supply. So these are all the determinants of supply, and you guys really need to know how to illustrate these graphs in all of these examples. So these graphs are extremely, extremely important for the illustration. And yeah, this is the review of our demand and supply and market equilibrium. I hope you guys found this video helpful, and tune in next time to our video about elasticities. Thank you.